everyone for joining us. I want to make sure that we start on time because we have a lot to discuss. And so want to make sure we taking advantage of all of that. I want to thank Councilmember Bob Mendes for joining us this afternoon. I know it's been a busy week for you, but thanks for taking the time to come and speak to everyone on the budget. Before we get started on the budget, I want to say a couple of things. Um, Many of you know what's been going on in our country for the last couple of weeks. These are not new things. These are things that within the African American community we've seen for a long time. As a mother, as an African American woman, as somebody who has two sons, I cannot tell you how suffocating, how scary, how mad it all makes me, not knowing what happens when my husband and my son steps out, knowing that what just happened just shows the value of the life of an African American man, and that's what we all been dealing with. Um, I'm grateful that yesterday Nashville showed up, and people protested in protested without violence, speaking up. So I want to thank the organizers. I want to thank everybody that showed up. So thank you for doing that. But I would tell you that I was a little bit disappointed when I woke up this morning, and most of the conversation on social media was about the riots rather than the peaceful protests. And I want to encourage everyone that we cannot lose sight of the things that are important. We cannot lose sight of why people are protesting. We cannot lose sight of how the lives of African American is being shaped, and as we see it in our own eyes. And these are important conversations. And so, everyone, please be mindful of that. I see a lot of people that are silent during the killings and the videos, but they choose to speak up when buildings and property are being destroyed. And to me, that tells me that they value properties more than people, and that is not a good feeling at all for me. And so let's be mindful of all of those. Let's support our minority community. Let's amplify our voice. This is something that I want to do. I did not want to cancel it because the budget is also a way to protest. The budget is a way to support the community. The budget is a way to empower the African American community. So I'm going to say this to all my colleagues that came out and joined the protest yesterday. Thank you so much for your support. But I hope that when we start talking about the budget, when we start voting on things that impact the African American community, that you will vote yes. A vote for the body camera is a vote for the African American community. A vote for empowering the African American community, a vote for the Community Oversight Board, a vote for issues, a vote for General Hospital is a vote for African American community. And I hope that you will continue to stand with our community. To my African American community, please take care of yourself, especially to the leaders. Unplug out of Facebook, stick with your families. Self-care, take care of yourself, and please do the census, be counted, vote. That is how you protest. That is how we make change. But more than everything, please let's us continue to look after each other and continue to take care of each other. So now, the budget. Oh, I see Quantitums. Thanks for joining. Tanya Hancock, thank you all for joining. So I have with me Mr. Bob Mendes, who is the expert on all things budget as the Budget and Finance Chair, and somebody who spent a lot of time, especially helping some of us that are new on how this whole process works. And so Bob is going to talk to us. I want him to talk specifically about the substitute budget. Over the last couple of Facebook Live that we've done, we've talked about the process, we've talked about how we got here. So we're not going to go into all of that. We're just going to go straight into the substitute budget. And I want Bob to be able to tell us what is in a substitute budget, how did he get to the numbers that he got to, what is the difference between his substitute budget versus the mayor's budget versus some of the other substitute budgets that we have. And we'll let him speak for a minute. Like we've always said, I don't like us to talk too much. I want us to be able to get into questions and answers. And so Bob and I will try to limit our speech, all of it. I know he has a lot to say to us, but hopefully we can get to your question and answers within the next 15 minutes. If you do have any question, do not wait. Start putting them in the chat box. and I'll be happy to ask them of Bob when we get to that point. So, Councilmember Mendes, thank you for joining us. Happy birthday to Sue. I know, yeah, I know that your wife just had a birthday, so we wish her a happy birthday. And so, thanks for being here instead of being with her. We appreciate that. But please, I want to talk about your budget in layman terms, what it is, what is the difference, what should we know about it, and then we can get into the question and answers.
Well, thank you for having me on the call, and thanks for your introductory comments about the events of yesterday and the last few weeks. The budget really does matter for inclusion and justice issues. I saw that we've got former Councilmember Erica Gilmore on, who I had the pleasure to sit next to in the chamber for 4 years. And Eric and I co-sponsored legislation to get the police department to just give statistics on traffic stops. And that was a 4-month fight just to get that passed. And we worked together on making sure that Nashville General had adequate funding for a couple of years in a row when it was really questionable. And the whole reason that I pushed a rate increase each of the last 2 years was that I saw this day coming. Where it would become very, very difficult to do anything more than tread water with the budget. And that's really where we find ourselves now after COVID-19, where we've got a budget that even with a large rate increase proposed by the mayor, $1, the budget really is just treading water and doesn't move forward on many of the important issues that you talked about. So when I was thinking about what the substitute was going to be, I have learned the lessons of the last couple of years, which is it is very, very, very difficult to the point of impossible so far in the history of Metro to get a tax rate different than what the mayor wants. It's never been done to get a rate higher than what the mayor wants. Last year, we probably made it our best shot and we came up a vote short. And this year, with the very difficult ability to not see each other face to face, not collaborate in the council chamber, just statistically, the odds of getting a higher rate are very difficult. And so I've made a choice to stick close to what the mayor proposed with a couple of options that I've got. I've floated 2 options in advance of the public hearing we have on Tuesday this week. And by the way, you can participate either by calling in or showing up live. Hopefully you call in. And I've decided to stay close because I just know that if I go too far from what the mayor proposes, it won't work out. And I might make a nice vision statement for what we ought to be doing for Metro, but it'd be a vision statement that doesn't get enough votes. And so the 2 options. One is the same rate as the mayor and moves money around a little bit differently. And the other nudges the tax rate up a little bit higher to $1.06. The cost difference between the two on a $250,000 home, the cost difference is about $41 a year. So they're really pretty close on cost. The $1 version, that's the same rate as the mayor. Basically all it does is it forces about $4.5 million worth of savings, where Metro just has to go find $4.5 million worth of savings from various departments, and then gives almost all that money to employees of Metro, not MNPS, of Metro, for their what's called step increases. And that's really important that we keep our employees up to speed on their compensation. The slightly higher version, the $41 or more for an average size house in the county, the $1.06 version does a little bit more. It gets Metro employees their step increases as well as 1% of COLA, cost of living increase. And then on the Metro side, I'm sorry, the Metro schools side, there's 2 amounts. One, there's $4.9 million to get everybody at MNPS up to $15 an hour. That's 1,500 people that are currently below $15 an hour. I think it's important to accomplish that because especially for people who are working with our kids all day, every day, they ought to at least make a living wage. And then there would be another $7.5 million for MNPS to spend how they like. There's other smaller differences that would be aimed to get nonprofits that help either minority businesses, small businesses, or students, help those kind of nonprofits a little bit more. But in terms of dollars, the real differences between what the mayor's proposed and my two options is how we treat our employees, which the last thing I'll mention is that has an affordability component to it. You know, one of the best things that Metro can do about affordable housing is Metro is, I think, the third biggest employer in the county, and paying fair wages for fair days work is one of the things we can do to impact affordability. So in a high level, that's what the differences are.
Is there a place to find this information, your detailed substitute, where I can point people to?
Sure. Right now on my website, Mendes for Nashville.com, I've got my most recent blog post goes through this in more detail. And then the actual budget documents will be available in the what's called the amendments package for the council meeting that'll come out tomorrow.
I just put, for those that are on the Facebook Live, I just put that link in the chat box. And so I'm waiting. I want to acknowledge that I've got Council Lady Tanya Hancock. I got some of the council members. Brett Withers is here, Ponte Chums, Dave Rosenberg. I want to thank all of you for joining. It feels as if we're having a council meeting. Now, we are in compliance with the Sunshine Law. This conversation was publicized, is on the website. This video was sent out, will also be on the Metro Facebook YouTube page, and so people can go and see it. So it's not something that is being done in secret, because I have my other colleagues on the line. So I want people to know that it's very open and it meets the standard for meeting, because we were able to notice it out in time, and we're going to also make it available to everyone. So at this point, I'm going to ask folks to start asking their question. Please put it in the chat box so that I can go ahead and see them and ask Bob. But I want to start with two questions of my own before we get into the chat box. And my first question is this, and this is very important in light of the recent events that we have, what happened yesterday and everything going on in the country. I must ask you this. The budget is very important as a social justice tool, as a way to ensure this equity. Would you tell me, as an African-American constituent, how is your budget different from everyone else? How does this address the issue of making sure that we're equitable, of making sure that the folks in the African-American community, that our needs are met? And I'm asking not just as a council person, I'm asking as a resident.
So I'm going to give you a two-part answer, Zulfat. And by the way, your technology works better than Metro, so maybe if the CPA if the CPA can work out, maybe you can go work for Metro. Director of IT. Two basic things. One, remember that I'm stuck. If I want something remotely passable, I'm stuck with a rate pretty close to what the mayor proposed. Before the budget came out, I knew that even though it would be painful, that the rate that we would need to be at to really move the city forward on any services at all would be more like $1.15 to $1.25 increase. That's just what the math was. And I understand, I mean, it's the mayor proposed what he proposed. He proposed $1. I know with 100% certainty, if I proposed $1.20 or $1.15, it again would be a lovely vision statement, but would go nowhere. So thing one to keep in mind is with the way the rules work, whatever the mayor picks is pretty close to where we're going to end up. That said, I tried to make it so all the differences between his proposal and my proposals went to help people that needed it the most, the people who are going to be impacted the most by the rate increase, which of course would be disproportionately people of color. And the main ways that it did that, some of them we already talked about. The salary increases are a big deal. and they're a big deal for affordability, and they're a big deal to keep Nashville from squeezing employees on pay and constituents on services. For too long, the way the budget's been balanced for the last couple of years has just been squeezing constituents, squeezing employees, and all of that disproportionately hurts people of color. Then the thing we didn't talk about earlier is most of the nonprofits that I'm trying to help more in my budget proposals are aimed at communities of color. For example, there's a TSU economic grant that the mayor proposed to cut in half from 50,000 to 25,000, and both of my proposals would put that back to 50,000. There's also what's called the specialty chambers of commerce, like the Black Chamber of Commerce. The mayor cut from 25 to 12,500. Both of my versions would put that back. There's also nonprofits that help MNPS school children, like Alignment Nashville. The mayor had cut that from 150,000 to 75,000. In my proposal, one of them puts it back partially, the other one puts it back all the way. I could go through all of them, but the common thread of the things that I'm trying to increase over the mayor's budget while staying pretty close to his rate are all things that I think would help people who are hurt the most by the rate increase.
Thank you. The other question that I wanted to ask you, this came up in the last conversation. Does your substitute address the difference between the GSD and the USD rate?
Yeah, and I
does
know
either one allocate the difference between the two?
So, yeah, and I'll do just a brief background. So everybody in the county pays the GSD rate, and then people who live in the more urban areas of the city pay, in addition, the USD rate. So most of what we all pay is called GSD, and some of us pay about 40 cents of rate more for living in the USD. There are some minor differences in services. The mayor proposed an increase that would only impact the GSD rate, and my dollar version only impacts GSD, and my 106 version is split 3.5 cents added to the mayor's GSD rate and 3.5 cents added to the mayor's USD rate. I know that's pretty in the weeds, but that's
thank you. I'm looking for questions. Folks, please stop typing. And maybe my technological skill that you just praised a minute ago is not as good as we think it is. So I need to make sure that I can find them. But while I'm scrolling to and looking for them, I do want to ask you specifically about the body cameras. It's a question that I've come up before on one of the Facebook Live that we've done. And again, in light of the recent things, because we have to make sure that our conversations are relevant and the decisions that we're making are relevant. And so can you speak to that? I want to say that I see that there's something in the capital improvement budget that says there's going to be like a 6 million on body cameras in there, but I'm new at this. Does that mean that we're going to get it this year? Does that mean it's funded? Is this something that people will see in the operations budget, or do we look somewhere else? Can you talk more about that to be able to enlighten me and everyone listening on that particular subject?
Yeah, so this will be sort of a straight talk express answer. I think what Mayor Cooper found when he came in office is that for all the lip service provided by the previous two mayors about getting body cams going, that nobody did, I guess I won't use expletives, nobody did anything to make it happen. There was no leadership from either one of the two previous mayor's offices to get a coordinated system between the police department, the DA, the public defender, and the court system, and the clerk's offices, all of which have to be involved. And I think Mayor Cooper found that when he came on board, that it had been the police department making literally all the decisions, and had spent $10 million or more on hardware for a system that would not do anything for the DAs, the public defenders, the courts, or the clerk's offices. It would just capture video in the field, and then did not accommodate doing anything with the video after the police had downloaded it. That's, I think, why Mayor Cooper shifted to hurrying to get a very small scale test system in the field, because there just wasn't any time. So many years had been wasted in planning that he wanted to get something out in the field. And I think that was probably the right choice. The reality is that right this second, there is not an agreed upon architecture between the DA's office, the public defender, the judges, and the police department. And depending on who you ask what the architecture of the system should be, there's a gigantic cost difference. And most of it would be capital dollars, not operating dollars. And so the bottom line is there, due to a couple mayors in a row not making this a mayor's office level priority, we are not as far along as a city as we need to be. One way or the other, there's no way to fix it in an operating budget. It's mostly capital budget to fix it.
Okay, thank you. There's a couple of questions. One is directed to me to see if there's closed caption available for this. Unfortunately, there isn't right now. I think when I read it, it said the host has to be ready to type it or something. So I did not figure that out well in time. But since the video will be recorded and on YouTube, on the Metro channel, you can select the option for closed captioning, I believe. I will look into that, and then for future broadcasts, we'll be sure to make sure that we want to be inclusive and we want everyone to be able to benefit from this conversation. And that was something we did not do and something that I promised to look into. For you, there's a question. So there's a question that you're asking the departments to find 4.4 million in savings. Will this affect employee? Does this mean that we may have to end up laying off people, or our department is supposed to find that 4.4 million?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I know that a lot of us in the council are sensitive to the fact that there have been targeted departmental savings for a few years in a row, really going back to the end of the Berry administration. And last year, the year we're wrapping up right now, there was some $20 million of savings forced on the departments. To the best of my knowledge, the 20 million absorbed this year did not result in any layoffs or letting employees go. Departments were able to do it by leaving positions open. And there's also some suggestion from the mayor's office that they believe that departments have, because there have been targeted savings for a few years running, that departments may build some cushion in. I don't know if I believe that. The facts are that there's no way to get anything more out of this budget without raising the rate higher. And so targeted savings are an option. The city absorbed 20 million this year without laying anybody off. This additional 4.4 is about 0.4%. And so it should be doable. But I've got that specific question into the administration about whether it would result in any layoffs right now.
Okay, let's hope it doesn't. Now, the next question is about the non-for-profit that you have in your, the ones that you added in or that you want that you're supporting. There's a question about whether does any of them provide shelter and food and mobility? Do they deal with our on-house populations? Or do they actually help people with home and food and shelter, the ones that you are supporting?
So is that Avi that asked that question?
How do you know?
I got the Facebook open here on the side. So you put the link in the comments to my blog post, and if anybody, if you scroll through the comments and you'll see the link to my blog post that Zulfat put up, and that's the link to a one-page summary of the differences between the proposals. And there you'll see specifically the things where there's a difference between the mayor and my proposals. This doesn't list things where we got the same amounts. So this isn't everything that Metro would fund. This is just the things where there's a difference between our proposals.
All right. The next question that I have is asking, do you anticipate that council will approve the 15 million required by the school board? Just your opinion, I guess.
I think not. I don't think there's going to be, I don't think so. But maybe I'm going to be wrong. I don't understand the math of how that would happen. And just to lay that out in more detail, so there would only be really two ways to make that happen. One is to push the tax rate higher. Every penny of property tax is about $3.2 million. So that 15 million is about 5 cents. And so you could push the tax rate higher 5 cents, which I think would be challenging politically. And then the other thing is Metro's, I'll call it savings, but that's really the wrong word. The mayor's budget and my budgets both call for accumulating about 14 days worth of operating funds and cash. That comes out to about $100 million. And 14 days of savings for anybody, whether it's a household or a business, if you're living off of 14 days of savings, that means you're living paycheck to paycheck. You need, your next paycheck to make it another 14 days. Right now, Metro is going to end the current fiscal year with the equivalent of 2 days of cash left. And we simply, my opinion is, mayor's opinion is, we have to build that up. And building it up to about 14 days is really just getting up to barely doable. I think there will be council members who propose that 14 days, let's do it with 12 days of cash, and that would free up another 10 million to spend on something like schools. And on the one hand, I can see the attraction of, hey, we're already living so in such dangerous balance of only having 14 days of cash by the end of the year. What difference does it make if we're only going for 12? It's still like, how much scarier is 12 than 14? So it's going to be attractive to some. I feel like just aiming for the 14 days of cash, the 100 million, is sufficiently scary to me that I'm not going to be in favor of reducing it at all.
That was my next question on the cash reserve, and I think you've pretty much. I'm one of the people that think that we should be able to dip a little bit into the cash reserve. I think that you save money when you have excess, and if you don't have money to save, then you should be able to dip into it. But my understanding, as you're saying, that since we only have 2 weeks, it's not enough to dip into, if I get you correctly.
Right. And the other thing that I mean, frankly, it's intimidating is the projection for revenue for this year is going to be wrong. Most years, but the finance department can project revenue pretty well because year over year, not that much changes. But this year, because of COVID-19, the revenue projections are built around the city getting back to 80% of normal revenue by January. And I guess if you got to pick a number, that is as reasonable as any. But when you think about the New Year's Eve celebration and the bowl game that happened at the end of December, does anybody think those are going to be 80% attendance? Should we be expecting that there will be 80% of normal revenue for the city by January? That worries me. And so every little bit that we, narrow down 2 weeks of savings to less than 2 weeks just seems like Well, it wouldn't be my choice, but I know we're going to have that out on the council floor.
And I can tell you that you probably will get me saying the other thing too. So I beg to differ. I do think that since we're basing it on estimates, the estimate could be wrong and go the other way, but the estimate could also be less, which is a possibility. And so I don't support us spending our cash reserve to it being extremely low. I think that we should have a lot in cash reserve. But I think if it's just a matter of a few millions here and there, we might be able to. But that's a different conversation. So I'm not the one. You and I are not having an argument here. So that's on the cash reserve. Now, one of the other things that has been suggested is loans. And I know that we got into this during the last Facebook conversation, but I know there are people that are on now that were not on there. So why can we not, considering that things are so tight, look into loans, whether it's from the federal government or whether it's other forms of loan? What is I know that your substitute does not address that or use any of that. Is there any reason why you did not?
Well, it's against state law and federal law to start with. There's been talk about, it's called the Municipal Liquidity Facility, got invented by the federal government 5-6 weeks ago. And there's been talk from some council members about borrowing from that. And as I understand it, we're not able to, under state law, we don't fit the federal definition of a plot of fitting into the program anyway. And then the math behind what I understand about the one of the proposed budgets that may be out there, the math is frankly ludicrous. If we qualified for the federal program and if state law allowed us to borrow for operating funds, which is basically the same thing as giving something to the pawnbroker to pay to buy groceries. But if we were allowed to do it, it would have to be paid back in 3 years. And as I understand the other budget proposal, we'd spend all the money in year 1, which means you'd have to raise taxes a lot in year 2 and 3 just to make the money back, to pay it back. It just straight across the board, it doesn't make any sense to borrow money for making ends meet any more than it makes sense to go to the pawn shop to pay groceries.
So that would include the 100-year municipal bond. That will be part of the. So you're saying we don't need to keep borrowing our way out of this.
And frankly, if the revenue projections don't come together because there's a big COVID outbreak during the fall or winter next year, and if it ever becomes legal under federal and state law, we may end up having to as a last resort. But it would only ever be a last resort, a definite last resort to borrow your way into an operating budget.
So there's a question about, everybody knows Nashville is booming. We all see the growth. There's growth downtown. Every time you travel or you go down, there's a new street, there's a skyscraper, the things that is going on. And so the question is, I know you've talked about it. I know I've talked about how we got here and why it just looked like an oxymoron. We are making money, but we don't have money. Can you just talk very briefly what's going on here? Why don't we have money when we have such a huge growth in the city?
So I know and our council friends on the call know that one of the things I do for a living as a lawyer is help financially distressed companies restructure. And there was early in my career, there was a company, I think it was in Memphis, it manufactured something. It doesn't matter what it manufactured. They would, the business owners would talk about, but business is great. We have so many sales. We're doing so well. And once you dug into their books, you found out that they actually had their stuff priced wrong and they lost money on every sale. And so every time they looked and said, gee, we just need more sales in order to do better, it would turn out they would just lose more money every time they had more sales because they didn't understand how to make money and they didn't have their prices set in the right place. And Metro has basically done that with the property tax. From 1980 to 2005, the property tax rate went up every 3 to 4 years. And talking to the finance department people who were there during that time, the city was in the political habit then of building a budget from the ground up and pricing what does it cost to run the city. And we've grown, we've done better as you know, if you look around. But since '05, the property tax rate has only changed one time. And the whole system, the whole economics of the city government were built around you change the tax rate, the city makes money for a couple of years, loses money for a couple of years, you change the rate again to get in the right spot. You make money for a couple of years, you lose money for a couple of years, fix the rate. And so it got set last in 2012. City made money for a couple of years, lost money for a couple of years, and then didn't change the tax rate. And so it kept losing more money and spending away all its savings and started selling stuff off. And the fact that the city's bigger, you know, we also have more roads, more water pipes, more kids in the city, more fire calls, more police calls. The bigger city means spending more, and we just haven't had property taxes set at the right price for quite a while.
So, all right. We made a big mess. We find ourselves in this hole. You want to do $1 or more. The mayor wants to do $1. But the people are losing their jobs. Things are not easy. We cannot do municipal liquidity facility. Loan is not a good option. So what about doing an incremental property tax rate proposal? What about doing a little now and doing a little next year? Why is that not an option?
So that's a great question, and I'll give you what I wish people would do is every time we talk about property tax rate, we talk about the complete lack of money in the city government. You know, we were talking a few minutes ago about $100 million seeming like a lot of money. That's ridiculous to run a city on 14 days worth of savings. Nobody would want to run their household that way. Nobody would want to run a business that way. The heading into this virus, the average rainy day fund for a big city in America was 4 months of savings set aside, 4 months of a budget. If we had been average for the 25 biggest cities in America, we would have some $600 million set aside. Instead of being average, we were in dead last place out of 25 biggest cities in America for how much savings we had. And that goes hand in hand with why doing it incrementally would be awesome if we had savings. But with no savings, if we did it incrementally, you'd have to go fire literally hundreds of employees. And as soon as Councilman Glover gets done figuring out which employees he wants to fire and proposes his budget, you're going to see what an incremental budget looks like. It's going to involve taking a machete to the city government. And unfortunately, due to the lack of savings, the only way to do it slowly would be to hack off large chunks of employees and services.
So you said that you don't think that the council will vote for the 15 million for the school board. Someone wants to ask, education is important. We all talk about how education is. We talk about how do you talk about economic development and growth in a city without making sure that our education is properly funded, equitably funded. And every time the school asks for money, we don't have it, and it's always the last one on the block. So how do we fund the schools?
Well, my smart alecky answer is get a time machine and tell council members 2 years ago what was going to happen, and maybe we would have passed the rate increase then, and then we would have been able to do it incrementally like we wanted to. But we didn't do that. And so we hit the COVID virus crisis with no real savings. The city has no real money saved up. So it's going to be a bitter pill for a while. The reason why alternative budgets try to do at least a little bit for the people who are going to be hurt the most by it, is to reflect the reality that it's not going to be fun. There's going to be 2 or 3 years of, if we do everything right from a fiscal planning point of view, for a couple, 2 or 3 budget cycles, then maybe 3 or 4 budget cycles down the road, we can get ahead of the game. But right now, we're gonna debate this year over whether it's 100 million or 90 million for savings. Next year, we're gonna have a debate about whether it's 180 or 160, because like we're gonna have to move it forward next year too, because 100 isn't adequate. Nobody would think 100 is adequate. Even your position is it's too much in a crisis, but for general planning, it's got to be 2 times that, 3 times that. The average city in America was 6 times that. I don't have a good answer to that other than to say we've squandered the opportunity to try to stay ahead, and now we're going to have to play catch up for a few years.
Tough question. So here's the you said something about the layoffs, about how we might have a proposal that is talking about layoff. And I think I asked this question before to some people that were on the panel. Businesses are laying off, things are tough. If businesses are laying off and people don't have jobs and people are closing their businesses, why is Metro an exemption? Why is Metro not considering that?
Yeah, this hits really close to home for me. In my restructuring law practice, I've had, unfortunately, the experience of walking with my client into a room full of employees and firing, 100+ people as part of a restructuring. And in private business and government and nonprofits, there's a lesson about firing and furloughs, which is once you kill a capacity for your organization, you just can't snap your fingers and turn it back on. And it's not like a light switch that way. So if you decide, we can do without libraries. Let's just shutter the libraries. We can get that back later. And you let go all the library employees, or you shut down libraries for half the week, or community centers for half the week. By the way, nobody is saying to do that except for maybe Councilman Glover. But assuming you were going to say that, so the economy gets better in 10 months and like, oh, great, let's open the libraries again. And then you find all your employees are gone, and it's just very hard to turn it back on. Government is not private business. Government needs to exist. Government needs to be here. People count on the government to be reliable. Garbage needs gets picked up. Kids need to be taught. You need the fire department to show up. You need the water to be clean. And I would argue you need libraries and you need parks. So I just don't think that private enterprise analogy works when you're talking about the reliability of government.
All right, thank you. So there's a question here about the chamber, and that ties on to the non-for-profit that are also providing shelter and water. You got about 2 or 3 people asking the same thing. Jan was asking that on your spreadsheet, she did not see any money allocated to food or shelter. And then Avi is saying that if we're going to give money to the chambers, why don't we give it to organizations that are providing shelters and food? Again, another shelter and food question. You have any take? Does your substitute have any of that? Is there any organization like that in yours?
Well, remember, this sheet only shows the differences between me and the mayor. I don't have a full list of everything that the city has already paid for and is in the mayor's budget that's staying the same. Basically, if he kept a budget the same as the previous year, I left it in place. I only looked at increases for things that he cut. So if there's something that's not listed here that Metro typically pays for, that means the mayor proposed to keep the budget the same year over year. The other thing that's really important for this upcoming fiscal year is that that Federal CARES Act and other relief money from the federal government is allowing for some direct payments, and especially when it comes to shelter and food, if the need is virus related, for individual organizations, there's a pretty decent chance that the administration is already planning to get them money directly outside of the operating budget.
Okay. All right, guys. I'm asking questions because I'm looking for yours. If I miss it, put it back in there. But while I'm still scrolling, one of the questions that we get all the time is that why is it that every time the government needs money, we always go to property taxes and we put the burden on homeowners? Why are we not looking at other sources of revenue? There's sales tax, there's impact fees, there's a lot of tourists coming into it, there's wheel tax. Why is it that people that bought a home in Nashville or Davidson County are paying for all of this? Why are we not looking into other sources of revenue?
Well, first of all, I would remind everybody that this century is now 20 years old, and the rate has only been increased twice in those 20 years. And so all the time part of that is not factually accurate. From 1980 to 2005, the rate went up every 3 or 4 years. Since 05, it's only been one time in 15 years now. So it's not all the time. Secondly, state law, I mean, you hear this a lot from Metro Council members, the state. This is a place where the state. The way taxes work in Tennessee is we can only create a tax that is specifically authorized under state law. So a lot of times people will play invent a tax where they'll say, well, why don't you tax X? If it's not on the list that the state lets us create, we're not allowed to invent it. And we live in a no income tax state, and state law pushes cities to get almost all their funding from property and sales tax. In Nashville, between property and sales tax, that's where we get 70% of our revenue, something like that, between the two of them, maybe 75% of our revenue. And that's where state law has pushed us. And the reality is, once you get so far behind like we are right now, we could triple every other fee that there is out there, and it wouldn't cover the ground. To cover the kind of ground we need to cover, especially with our sales tax already close to maxed out, property tax is really the only place to go. I would add the normally very conservative Chamber of Commerce has done a study of peer cities that shows that Nashville has by far the overall lowest tax load between sales, property, and other fees of all the peer cities in the region. We've got the lowest tax rate currently right now that Nashville has ever had. We've got the lowest tax rate of any city in the state of Tennessee.
So what I'm hearing is that, for example, our sales tax is $925. The maximum we can do is $975. And then the other type of taxes that is there, if we increase them right now, is not going to get us or help us get out of the mess that we've created. That's basically what you're saying. So I've got another wonderful idea for you. So how about all those people that are making a whole lot of money in Metro, making 100, 200, 75,000? Why don't we reduce some of their a paycheck, cut it by 20%? Is that something that we can do? Because we're looking for money wherever we can get it. And so if we have all these high wage earners, let's say 75,000, or let's even say 100,000, can we just take 20%, ask them to take a cut? While you at it, can we ask council members, because we just got a raise in 2019. It's not a whole lot of money. I need to say that because I don't want people thinking that council is making a whole lot of money, but there is a raise. But why can't we cut that now that we need some money? What's your take on that?
Well, I'll start with the rest of Metro and then end up with the council. For the rest of Metro, I think there's two issues. One is I'm told by our lawyers that there's significant civil service problems with cutting some employees, but not others. So I'm told that that literally the council is not able to do that. It would have to be a change that would go through the Civil Service Commission, be approved there, and then come to the council. So in the context of the budget, we are not able to do that. Maybe it could be a project for later. More broadly, maybe this is my private industry experience bleeding through, but if you want to gut an organization, you go ahead and cut the top 10 people's salaries. And I don't know, I mean, there's probably departments where that might be a healthy thing to do. Straight across the board, probably not. And the third thing there is, I don't know what the number is, Zulfat, but I can't imagine that that's more than a couple million, a handful of $1 million. And when the mayor's raising $300 million on a property tax increase, that might be a penny or two. And so is the damage that you do to the employee base worth it for 1 or 2 cents of property tax? For the council, if you want to get on an issue that's cost saving for the council, don't look at the relatively low compensation we get. Take a look at the giant lucrative health insurance benefit that we get after we're done in the council. I made proposed legislation last term to reduce that. And for those of you who don't know, if you serve 2 full terms, you get Metro subsidized health insurance for you and your spouse and your family for life. So you get a 75% discount on health insurance after you serve 8 years for life. And so with some of the younger council members that will wrap up 2 terms when they're in their 30s, the present value of a lifetime of 3/4 off of health insurance is something like a $250,000 benefit. I did that present value analysis a couple of years ago. And so by far the most lucrative thing we get is the lifetime discounted health insurance, not the salary. So if you want to cut into that, I'll co-sponsor that tomorrow.
But that's not going to help this budget conversation. No. And I do want to say that for people that don't know, I think that comes to about $400,000 a year. The health insurance that Metro pays. I think I saw something like that, and the salary of the council is actually even less than that. So I will say this for all my colleagues that are out there: the work that we do on the council and the salary that the council pays is not even the same. It's a 24-hour job, and what is being paid for somebody like me and Bob, we have other sources of income, we have other salary that it doesn't matter. But for people that don't, it's not enough to even cut into. I'm not recommending it. I'm not saying that, but I'm just asking the question that I don't want to leave you with the impression that there's a whole lot of money out there that the council is making. That's not the idea. Now, somebody wants to know if we can, 2 things. It said, with all the proposed budget, that is the substitute budgets that are out there, would they satisfy the comptroller requirements in your opinion? And I don't want us to get into, I don't want to do debates. This is more informational for everybody. If you don't want to answer it, you don't want to answer it. But someone is asking, do you think all of the proposed budget will meet the comptroller's requirements?
Definitely not. If Councilman O'Connell's ever gets proposed, that would not satisfy the comptroller. Councilmember Benedict's would. My 2 definitely would, assuming we don't cut into the $100 million savings. The mayor's would, and I don't think the comptroller would be the concern with Councilman Glover's. I think it would be, buying enough tourniquets for the Metro government to still survive.
So there's a question here about the CARES Act. How and when will the use of the CARES Act, especially the 121 million that we have, do you know when that will be determined? Do you have, because we're talking about, we may have to raise taxes. From what I hear from you, you're saying $1 more. Everybody else is saying, I mean, at some point, everybody said we're going to raise something. People are hurting, people don't have money. Can this CARES Act be used in some way? Do you have any say on how and when that will be used?
So, as you know, that's a developing thing. Metro is the federal government passed the CARES Act. Metro for sure has already received $120 million. It's sitting in a bank account. It's got very strict limitations. It's got to be spent by the end of this calendar year. It has to be virus related, and it has to be something that's not in your operating budget. And that's, you know, and so we got to figure out fast. The mayor has a working group that's private that he's keeping to himself about what they're talking about, that is looking at options. And Councilmember Toombs and I have proposed that we include with the budget ordinance a requirement to set up a 9-person commission to make an initial report by August 1 and a final report by November 15 about what to spend the money on. We know for sure that any expenditures of the money will have to come through the council for approval. I have strongly urged the mayor to take an aggressive leadership role in communicating with the community about what to spend that money on. I think my own personal feelings are that the leading candidate for the use of the money should be to get distance learning going with MNPS in time for the school year. That is right around the corner, and I don't know what that cost is, but I'm sure it's substantial. That fits the requirements of the CARES Act, and that's the sort of thing, like, I mean, there's a lot of ideas out in the community. I want to make sure to collect the ideas from the community. I personally think making distance learning happen for kids if they have to learn remotely is got to be, if not the highest, near the top priority.
Okay. There's a whole conversation going on about whether we need to shrink the size of the council because it's so large and maybe save some money with that. And I see Councilmember Toombs saying that there was a charter amendment and the voters said they don't want it because it's about representation and making sure, because we're a metro budget, metro council. And so to have representation from all over the county. But that's something that is still worth pursuing if that's something that our colleagues want to put back on the table. Avi wants to know at some point, and Avi, we can make a request to the finance department to make sure that we have a list of all the non-for-profit that is being funded. Like Bob said, his one pager is just about the difference between what the mayor has and what he has. But if you want to look at all that we have that goes to food and shelter, I think we can provide that. I also like what Bob said about let's look into the CARES Act. I know definitely in the CARES Act there is provision for the homeless population that it can be used for. And I think we should make sure that we're optimizing the use of those dollars for that purpose. Anybody else have any question? I'm trying to scroll and make sure that I do not. Somebody said to make sure that every student have access to long distance learning, we need to make sure they have Wi-Fi connection to be able to do that.
Yeah, two things on that real quick. I think what little conversations I've had with the administration and MNPS about distance learning is that it would be two parts. It would be the device that kids got, and it would be a hotspot. So if there wasn't service at home, you could get it through the hotspot. Both of those would have to go hand in hand. On the Metro Council size thing, just real briefly on that, I think it's worth seeing both sides of the coin there. First of all, people got to understand that the size of the council was a political compromise to get Metro created in the first place. And the size was specifically made to enhance minority representation. And while that's 55 years ago, people haven't forgotten about that. And so they're always, if you're ever saying, let's make the council smaller, you got to understand that it's going to be perceived by many as let's reduce the minority participation in the council. And that's not what people mean a lot of times when they say it, but that is a thing that gets heard. And then secondly, I always mention, Nashville's been pretty dang successful over the last 55 years since the Metro government was created. And while it's really easy to look at the Metro Council as a mess, ugly, hard to watch, we are a representative body. We represent the county, and maybe Nashville's success is in part due to the relatively unique size of the council we have, even though it's a mess to watch sometimes. So I've always got mixed feelings about the idea of making it smaller. Plus, every single time it's ever come up, voters have beat it down, the idea of making it smaller. So I think I respect the feeling that it's too messy at the current size, but I think the city's managed so far, and we can keep managing.
All right. Thank you. Now, somebody wants to know whether the council will accept the recommendations of the committee with regards to the spending of the 121 million CARES Act. I think I would say that as long as there is representation on the committee and that there are people, because let me be honest, the list that came out, I'm so glad that Equity Alliance is on there, but I was shocked that we have CEO of AT&T and Amazon in the group. And one of the pushback that we've had, when you think about the PPP, the money that went into payroll protection plan for businesses, overwhelmingly, all the CARES Act fund went to big companies. A lot of the smaller companies are not able to get much out of it. And so for me, when we're talking about CARES Act locally, I want the people making the decision to be people that are impacted. I want it to be representation from the small business. I want to be representation from the minority group. I want to be representation from people that actually can make use of it. So my understanding is that the current committee that the mayor has is one that will allow the mayor to look for more funding. There's still going to be another committee that will be formed by the end of June, which the council will have a representative on, that we actually look into how this will be spent. And I can assure you, I can speak for myself and most of my colleagues that a lot of us are very interested in how that money will be allocated, and that we're watching, because we know that there is an opportunity to actually help some of the impact of this, if the taxes should pass, the impact of raising taxes on people, that we can actually help some of those social services work that needs to be done, some of our small businesses, helping them, and the individuals in the community. So I'm saying that we are all watching, and we will continue to watch. That's a promise. So we're going to look into that, and I'm sure Bob feels the same way.
I agree. Yeah, definitely. Well said.
All right, thank you. I want to give a shout out to Fallon. She just joined, and I wanted to mention Fallon specifically because we're talking about access. One of the questions that I asked the other time, and I think in the budget hearing with the school board, is that when we give computers to students, we need to make sure they have the Wi-Fi to use it. Otherwise, it's not equitable. Not having access to the internet makes the laptop useless. And so Fallon and Ashford use have been champion of making sure that the voices of Black in technology is at the table. And I hope that our leaders continue to listen to them. I'm going to, Bob, do you have anything to say before I close out? Because we're right at 4.
Go for it.
You're good. All right. So I want to thank everyone that has joined. Thank you for your question. I want you to continue the conversation on the Facebook page. If you have more questions for Bob, please type it on there. I'm going to encourage Bob to please go back and answer some of those questions. I will scroll to and see if there's anything that I need to add or put to it. But we started this conversation with what has been happening the last couple of weeks and the impact and the stress on the life of African Americans. I want everybody to know that the budget is a big part of it. I'm going to encourage you to please center the voices of African American, especially when you're talking about issues on how to be a fair city. Make sure they're centered, make sure that you support them. Thank you all so much for joining. I'm looking forward to the next conversation. Please don't forget, on Tuesday, there will be public hearing on the budget. Please continue to listen, continue to engage your district council person, and continue to engage us. So thank you for joining us. Bob, thank you so much. I know we got into that, push back on the reserve a little bit, and I'm still going to continue that, but it's a good conversation. Thanks for your wealth of experience and your knowledge, and for all that you do. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Zulfat, thank you very much for doing these. You really, this is a tremendous service that you've done for the community, especially in this time when we are having a hard time connecting. So really, thank you for doing this.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. You have a nice weekend.